Awesome. Okay, so the first time I watched the movie, I was at home on my laptop by myself. It was so much more fun to watch it with all of you. I'm sure as a filmmaker, Jacoba, you loved watching it with us. But thank you all for being here. I mean, I think there's so many parts of this film that I relate to, you know, sitting in rooms with my girlfriends trying to figure out how to get help because our doctors are looking at us like we're crazy and saying we're fine. And it's really such a privilege to be able to bring this information to the community and these conversations. So that you know, this is part of a series of conversations we've had. Some of you may have been at the others. We had a town hall in the spring, I think. Don't ask me the timeline, but where we had two doctors, Dr. Leach, who is here and is a doctor in Walnut Creek, who's part of the Menopause Society and part of our community, and Dr. Patel, who started the UCLA Menopause Clinic. It's the only full menopause clinic in the state that I know of. Although John Muir is coming close with our third menopause doctor coming, so I hear. And we're trying to start one at UCSF. And they did a real Q&A on sort of menopause and what to know and dispelling rumors, and that is on our website. So if you want more information on the medical perspective, that's available on our website. Tonight we're really going to talk about the film, and neither of us are doctors. So, but it's really fun. I mean, one of the things that I think is important that I want to touch on before I introduce you to Jacoba is that, you know, it says in there, they talk about the government and the government's role being to take care of you and your community. And that's my job. I mean, I'm a public servant and I'm here to serve you each and every day. And the more I learned about menopausal care and how little was out there for us, the more I realized that our government was failing us. So last year I introduced a piece of legislation that I felt was exciting and didn't appear to be very controversial. It required that insurance companies would cover things like testosterone. So in California, we were going to get covered for all menopausal care. And it had to be a little bit different than the other care because most of it is not FDA approved, especially, you will learn, if you are a woman with, that cannot have the standard estrogen, systemic estrogen. That is, the other treatments for women who have cancer risk or whatever the case may be are not covered by insurance. As a result, we had to sort of write the bill in a way that didn't require FDA approval because most of what we get is not. It flew through the legislature with bipartisan support. I was presenting it on the assembly floor. One of my Republican colleagues yells, "Well, I'm voting yes because I'm having a hot flash right now." And it was vetoed by the governor. We were shocked. I will tell you that our male governor vetoed that bill was maybe the shock of the year. We had no idea that was coming. But today we reintroduced the bill. Usually when you get a veto, you're like, well, let me narrow the bill and try to make the governor happy. That's not what we're doing this time. We made it bigger. So I'll see your veto and I'll raise you some more policy. So it contains exactly the same protections for insurance coverage that last year's had, but now it includes education. So this year, the bill will also require, last year's bill required insurance companies to extend the standard of care to all doctors, so that at least they were getting that. But this year, we're doing that plus requiring continuing education for every physician whose patient population is more than 25% female. And that is in part, because some of what we've learned through this journey, we held 3 informational hearings on menopause last year. It was the first time in the Capitol that on camera we were all talking about vaginal dryness. My male colleagues were a little uncomfortable, but it was great. But it's not, we can't just be teaching our OBs, right? You heard it. We need to be teaching our neurologists, our dermatologists, our whole body, our cardiologists, our whole bodies are impacted in this part of our life. And every one of us probably knows a woman who was having some weird symptom and went to some specialist, and that specialist couldn't figure out what was going on with her, and it turned out it was menopause, right? So we really feel, myself and my many co-authors on this bill, that really every doctor that treats women needs to have this information. And so we're going to send it back to the governor and see what happens this year. But as we announced today in our release, this year I'm doing it side by side with Halle Berry. So we'll see what happens. So that's what's happening at the legislature. It relates to menopausal care. It's a really exciting time to be doing this work. You know, we heard from Genentech. I think someone who was supposed to be here from Genentech I don't know if that happened, and now they're probably gonna be embarrassed because I called that out. But we really need to be thinking about this in sort of a comprehensive way about women who are really at their peak, right? As you think about us in our 50s, that is when we're at the peak of our careers. We are ready to give back to the world, as you heard at the end of the film, and the world just sort of doesn't care about treating our mental health, our sleep, et cetera. And so, we will be looking at the workforce impacts, as you heard in the film, and other things, but we're starting with your care. And I will say that as a woman who is getting treatment, one of the things I loved about this film, and I was telling Kobe this before, my doctor might be in the room, so I hope his ears are closed. I had a week last week. I have 3 kids. They were 10, 13, and 15. I didn't make it to the pharmacy to pick up my patches, and I was 4 days late. And I was drinking 17 cups of coffee and felt like crap. And I put it on Sunday, woke up Monday morning, and was like, I can take on the world. And I was like, oh, right, this really works. So I will say that if you take anything away from anything I present, and I think the film as well, and you can disagree with me, is go see a doctor and have a conversation. Because, I'm in this community. I have friends who are in their 40s. I will tell you, I've taken 2 things away from all this work I've done over the last year. Talk to a doctor. And don't use pellets. So for those Danville women who are using pellets, I need you to go talk to a doctor about that. So, okay, now we're going to talk to Jacoba Atlas. So, Kobe, see, there's a lot of mumbling now that I said don't use pellets. I know, there's a lot of women that use the pellets. Okay, so, oh my God, you don't know. Okay, see, I'm not the doctor, so I shouldn't be telling you this, but pellets are these little things, and Dr. Leach, you can stand up and yell at me if I'm getting this wrong. But I'm watching him. So they are pellets that are put into you, and they contain hormones, and they are not FDA approved, and the release of the hormones, as I've learned over time, is not regulated in a way that works in your body. And in a hearing, and the hearings are also online if you want to watch them, the doctor from UCSF, who I've been working with on this, talked about women coming in who were now diagnosed, and not that the pellet had caused the cancer, but like you heard, the hormones can exacerbate the growth of cancers, and they cannot come out. Once it is in, it cannot come out. And she had patients, and she describes this in the hearing, that came in with the pellets, it cannot be removed, and she was like, okay, now what, right? And these are not, what physicians are giving you. And so she, in the hearing in the Capitol, really wanted to spend a good amount of time talking about how these pellets are not the way you want to be treated for menopause. And in most cases, if you go see a doctor, and the Menopause Society, which you heard about a lot in the film, is a great place to find the right doctors who've been trained, they can have that conversation with you. But it's my little PSA for all of you. Okay, so now that we've answered that question, so I'm going to tell you about Kobe, because she's really, really impressive. So she's an award-winning documentarian and broadcast executive with an extensive list of credits, which include an Emmy and a Peabody for her work of projects including Survivors of the Holocaust. And anyone who knows my background, I have a special place in my heart for that work. We were actually talking about how my grandmother was part of the Shoah Project, which is part of where her work came from. She co-wrote and executive produced Birthing Justice, and we'll hear a little bit about how that led to this work, and co-wrote and directed Push Out, the criminalization of black girls in schools. Her other well-known projects include Dying to Tell This Story, which was shortlisted for an Oscar, and Profiles of Extraordinary Women for OWN, hosted by Julia Roberts. Oh, I wish I was besties with Julia Roberts. She's written and produced and directed 7 primetime PBS documentaries, including Too Important to Fail, which details the education crisis facing black boys, A Call to Conscious Destruction of Martin Luther King Jr.'s pivotal Vietnam speech, and Conducting a Life, a profile of conductor Gustavo Dudamel. From 2000 to 2006, Kobe was head of national content for PBS. For the Turner Network, she wrote and produced 6-part Emmy-nominated landmark series, A Century of Women, about the history of women in the 20th century. The research and complete interviews from the series are archived at the Schlesinger Library at Harvard. And she began her career with NBC News. So, like I said, super impressive woman. And she flew up to be with us today. So thank you for being here, Kobe.
I'm so thrilled to be, can you hear me? Yeah, I'm so thrilled to be here, and thank you all for coming. And I was sitting in the back, and I absolutely love hearing your response and where you get the laughs in there, and some of it's a knowing laugh, and some of it's just because, like, Sharia is so darn funny, we had to bleep her, but she was just because of, FCC regulations. But she was so funny, and I loved the way you responded to certain things in this. My producing partner, Denise Pines, and I have been working over the last 5-6 years on social justice documentaries, which Rebecca referenced, and Denise has been working in the medical, she's been on medical boards, and she's on the board of MLK Hospital in South LA, and we've always been interested in medical issues, and we started talking about menopause like 4 years ago, maybe 3 years ago. No one was interested in financing this. There were 2 very small foundations that came in. Another foundation came in as we finished it, and now we're doing all this outreach, but we could not get anybody to have any traction with this. And over the course of the 3 years, this has so changed. I mean, thanks to what Rebecca's doing, thanks to what Halle Berry is doing, and Naomi Watts is doing, and Oprah, and Mrs. Obama, and all of these really incredible women who are saying, wait, that's me, let's talk about this. So that's why we wanted to make this documentary, so that you'd be deluged with information. And I think we crammed so much into the hour. There were things that we couldn't include. But I hope the takeaway is that you feel empowered, you know that there's solutions, and you have to go to a caring physician who understands menopause, who will talk you through your options. No documentary, no matter how good it is, can ever be the prescription for you. Everybody's different, and everybody responds differently. So my takeaway is what you said. Let's find these really great doctors, and there's ways now on the Menopause Society website where you can find them. And my takeaway is I hope you do, because that will make all the difference in your life. Just personally, I like Sharon Malone, has been on HRT forever, and I plan to be on low-dose HRT until the day I die, which I hope is way in the future. So there you go.
I love that. I had an obstetrician who was testifying in one of my hearings about my bill last year, and she said, just so everyone's clear, they will pull my last patch off of me in the coffin. And I was like, well, okay, I'm in. But yeah, I think there's so many. So I want to start with, so many of us grew up with mothers who believed that hormone replacement was going to cause cancer. I mean, that's what our mother's generation were taught. And when I told my mom that I was going to see a doctor and considering this, it freaked her out. Because that's
really?
The generation, yes, that she's a part of. And her mother had breast cancer, and she was convinced it was going to give me breast cancer. But I think that one of the things that's really interesting about the film is there is this piece about dispelling myths. Mm-hmm. Do you want to talk a little bit about that?
Yeah, there's so many myths out there, and one of them, and it's so it continues. This study that was done now 23 years ago still resonates, not just with the population where you have this thing in the back of your head, wait, estrogen, all of this is going to give me cancer. But doctors actually still believe it. And you heard that from Sharon Malone, where she went to her internist, and the internist said, I'm not a fan. And of course, Sharon's no shrinking violet, and said, I didn't ask you. This is my expertise. So that's one myth. And there's so many other that's a myth, but there's so much other misinformation that worries me, and some of it, and I don't want to demonize this across the board, but it's now become a big business. Menopause has become a big business. And I think whenever there's a basic profit motive that is driving, it's always suspicious to me. And I worry about some of the supplements. It wasn't in this documentary. We just didn't have time to do justice to it. But all of our medical experts are very skeptical about supplements, and really were cautious to say that you've got to do your research to make sure that what you're taking is what you need to take, and that it won't counteract with anything else that you're taking. So part of my concern about some of this now focus on menopause is that, Dr. Google and the internet, which we go to all of the time for information, and you talk to your friends, and all of that's really good, but they're not necessarily experts, and they won't necessarily know what will work for you. So That's a big caution for me about the misinformation that's out there, about how supplements will work, about what estrogen and progesterone will actually do. What if you have some kind of cancer? Every single cancer is different. You know, my brother-in-law is an oncologist, and every single piece of what he knows about cancer is almost siloed. So you can't make these generalizations about, well, HRT is no good because somebody in your family once had breast cancer. And you will hear that from your friends. So I just urge you to dig deeper and to get the resources that you need. And fortunately, because of the attention now on menopause and the work that you're doing and getting legislation changed, you will be able to access good information. And I love that part of this new bill is that doctors need the training, because a lot of them want that training and they don't know how to get it. They don't know where it resides. And that should be part of any doctor's training. Particularly, I want to add psychiatrists and psychologists, because a lot of what I think is identified as depression or the blues or mood changes is not really a pathological depression, but something that's linked to menopause. I'm not a doctor, so I'm just putting that out there.
Yeah, it's interesting. But during my own journey, I talked to first my OB, who said, "Oh, you'll be fine. Just suffer through it." Then I talked to my internist, who told me that I didn't need anything. What I was doing was fine. And I was like, I feel horrible. My brain fog, interestingly, like the movie, it was my brain fog that drove me to go get help. And it took the third doctor, you know, me finding the Menopause Society through a friend. But I have to say, so most people would stop at those first two doctors, right? And then what do? Then you end up in this marketplace, which feels like, at what other point do we have medical needs where we're like not able to talk to our doctors about it, and instead we're going into some for-profit world trying to find help? And that's part of why this bill is focused on continuing education, because you should be able to go to your physician with any health problem and talk to them and get the resources you need, and not be searching the internet, which is currently what women are doing because they have no other resources. It is so sad. And I loved the part in your film where she said, this is the one thing we all have in common. If you live long enough, every single woman will go through it. And it's true. And yet, you know, there's a question in here about, you know, menopause research and how do we increase funding for menopause research. It's a great question. We actually just requested data from the UCs. The UCs are our biggest research institutions in the state. And I get to fund the UCs, so they get to answer to me. And so we asked them, we want to see your research dollars. How much is going to women? How much is going to men? How much is going to women in menopausal age? And we did just get really not satisfactory answers back, so we're going to go back to them again, because they have to answer us, because if not, we can subpoena the information, so they'll give it to us. But we'll do an official audit, which they don't want. And, you know, I do think it's really critical that we talk about that. We talk about the research dollars. I mean, the NIH numbers you have in this film are shocking. And I think that what Dr. Biden did was so critical in pushing the NIH forward. Mm-hmm. You know, I fear what the future of that looks like, but you want to touch on that?
I mean, we do. Two of the people in the film, Lisa Mosconi, has a big grant from the NIH, and that wonderful PhD nurse in Iowa City is working with Latinas and menopause, and she is a big NIH. And I haven't emailed them, and I will do that tomorrow. I don't know what the status is of that. I don't know if those dollars are still forthcoming. I don't know if all of the money that was allocated by former President Biden is still on the books and is still being allocated. So women really need to be aggressive about this. We did a little bit, we meaning Denise and I did a little bit when we looked at some of the new money that was coming from NIH and how much of that was going now to menopause, and it was less than 13 million. Now, that doesn't mean that that's the only money going to it, but that was what was being put forth for the next 3 years, 13 million to menopause studies. That's just not right. We're 51% of the population. Every woman, everyone with, the XX chromosomes will go through menopause. This is not something that some women will go through, some women won't. one funny story, which I will say, Denise, when she started working on this, was talking to some of her friends, and they would say, "Oh, I never went through menopause." And she said, "Well, wait a moment, you're 64 years old. Are you still having your period?" "No, of course not." And so Denise said, "Guess what? You're in menopause." Because they were women who fortunately did not have any severe symptoms, and they think without severe symptoms, you don't have menopause. But you do. All of us will. All of us females in this room will go through menopause at some point in our lives.
Yeah. So, I mean, here we can control the budget of the UCs, and so we can require them to do equal research. So we'll see what these numbers show, and we can put in the budget that they have to do it. I will say one of the problems that I've learned is that menopausal care is a cost saver, as you heard, right? So women who get menopausal care save our healthcare system lots of money, but it's not a profit center for hospitals, which is very much how hospitals are run, even our UCs. And so, we were able to get Dr. Patel at UCLA, who started the menopause clinic, was able to get the menopause clinic started there, honestly, because Halle Berry went in and told her story to the people in charge. And Halle Berry's story is very compelling, and she's Halle Berry. But we haven't been able to do that at UCSF and other places because, this is really important care, but it's not, surgeries and other things that bring in the dollars. And so, how do we continue? One of the things we're talking about in the legislature, and I come out of the corporate world where cost savings count, and for some reason in government they don't count, which confuses me a lot. And so we are having a conversation continually around how can we budget in a smarter way where we can account for those cost savings, because obviously those are dollars too, which I know this sounds crazy. I thought it was crazy too. So one of the questions is, so this is a really interesting one, and I like this because you had in here, you had dentists, you had OBs, you had sort of all people who treat, neuroscientists. So this person says, when I ask questions related to my symptoms, my general practitioner says, ask your gynecologist. Then the gynecologist says, talk to your psychiatrist. And the psychiatrist says, talk to your OBGYN. How do we stop the cycle and get the resources we need? And I think that's sort of interesting, especially given in the film you have all of these different providers.
Yeah, I mean, that really goes to the heart of it, doesn't it? I mean, what we need is for your primary care doctor. For most women, I think that still is an OBGYN. I mean, I know people have family medicine, but a lot of us rely on our OBGYNs to take care of us. They need that training. They need that training so they don't say, oh, I don't know, go find this person. They need to be able to say, I know, and this is what I found out, and there's more information on the menopause website. There's more information from the Johns Hopkins, from the Mayo Clinic. They need to be the person that you go to. You can't, it can't be, well, go talk to this person. I will say, just a digression for a second, I had no idea about the any dental connection with menopause at all. I was like gobsmacked. What are you talking about? But they did this big study. That's an insurance company, but they did a big study about menopause and oral health. And they found that dentists didn't know anything about it, that women didn't know anything about it. And I think there's probably a lot of areas where we have things going on in our bodies that are tied to menopause, and we don't have a clue that they're tied to menopause. And unfortunately, too many medical professionals don't have a clue either, and that has to change. And I absolutely believe that that is going to change for the next generation of young women.
Yeah, we've been researching if we can also require it on the boards. So doctors have to take boards. So I want to know if we can get a question on there, because if it's on the test, they'll teach to the test. But it turns out the legislature doesn't control what's on the test. But I keep saying, I'm the lawmaker. Can I control what's on the test? So we'll see. I wanted to touch on one thing which I found. So you did a film on maternal mortality focused on Black women and wellness and the much higher rate of maternal mortality in Black women. And I really love the part of the film where you focus on the disparities in menopause, both how women experience it and how women experience care. We had at one of my hearings a researcher out of Stanford who had looked into the fact that Black women have surgically induced menopause much more frequently than white women and are not being given the care they need post-surgery as they sort of shoot into menopause. And it was just shocking to hear this researcher talk about the experience of Black women as they go into menopause. And I think it's something we don't talk about enough. So I, wanted you to talk a little bit about that.
Yeah, it's incredibly important, and Omi Sade talks about it, and Sharon Malone talks about it, and that was one of the reasons why, even though it's a digression where we talked about the mothers of gynecology, because we wanted to just frame this in a bigger picture, that this is something that Black women have confronted and endured for so long. It's, with enslaved women right to today, where they're not listened to, or they're told, and we found this out when we were doing Birthing Justice, where still doctors believe that Black people, men and women, don't feel pain to the extent that white women do. This is bizarre beyond belief, right? But this was a study that was done not too long ago from young doctors at Harvard, where they still check that. So it's a really difficult situation to recognize that we're not all a monolith and that we all respond differently. Wen Shen was very articulate, I think, about Asian women and how they respond differently, and Latina women responding differently. But going back to research, there's not enough data, and data drives everything in terms of what gets funded, what gets talked about, what gets accepted as medical truths. There's not enough data about why is this? I mean, we know it's different, we know it is, but why is it different? And when, touched on weathering, which is a really interesting thing that's now being studied for Black people in this country, but why is that? And we don't know. This is why when we were doing the interviews, people would say, we need so much more research, we don't know anything. And I said, well, we can't put that in our documentary because you're telling us all sorts of things that you know. You can't tell us that you know that HRT is good for you, or you know this or that, and then you say, we know nothing. So it's not that doctors don't know anything, but they don't know enough, and they still have so many questions that need to be answered. And just briefly staying with this, when we were doing Birthing Justice, we profiled the Martin Luther King Community Hospital in South Los Angeles. And when they opened, they did their ED, their emergency room, to see 40,000 patients a year. The first year that they were open, they saw 120,000. This is before COVID. So this is where a lot of people of color who don't have great insurance, or any insurance, this is what they use as their primary doctor. So we're complaining about we can't find a good doctor. Right. They go to an ER room when they're saying, I can't concentrate on, and they're trying to deal with, broken bones. So there's so much disparity in this country about who gets treated and who gets paid attention to. It's just something that all of us have to be aware of and hope that we can do something about it.
Yeah, I mean, two things on that. One is that as we talk about the research dollars, we need to make sure that they're focused on women of color appropriately, right? Yeah. That we're not focusing those dollars in just one place. And it's interesting. I think one of, we try to look at the silver linings coming out of the pandemic. There aren't so many, but one of them is the expansion of telehealth, because we know there are serious healthcare deserts, not just in rural California, but also for our low-income Californians who are in Medi-Cal. There are not enough providers. And the expansion of telehealth, we hope we can continue to push more providers into places where they're hard to reach, but it's slow moving, so we need to do more of that. Okay, so I think this is, I'm going to pose this to you and then I'll answer, because you do a lot on the policy here, and I know you've looked into a lot on policy, but this question is, how do we increase legislative change and funding? We talked a little bit about the funding, but for menopause initiatives, how do you think folks can get engaged in the change that we need to see in the world?
Yeah, I mean, this goes back to what everybody says about policy change, is that you have to advocate for it. You have to be calling your representatives and saying, this is what I want. I won't accept that we aren't doing this. So things get moved forward because the public demands it. That's why it's so important. We think about celebrities and there's the good and the bad, but the moment people like Naomi Watts and Michelle Obama and Halle Berry started talking about menopause everywhere, they can go on every single program and want to talk about this, where even the good doctors can't get on those programs. So we need to have that intense focus on what needs to change, and that's on all of us to make sure it happens.
Yeah, I mean, I told you my sad story about my veto. But it's interesting. I mean, like you, actually, it's interesting. You started your journey on maternal mortality and then moved into the menopause space in filmmaking. So when I joined the legislature, as I mentioned, I was just turned 40, and I started I knew enough to know, we were in Trump 1 at the time, that we were on a path to the overturning of Roe v. Wade. And so I started the Select Committee on Reproductive Health, which was, our select committees are a way for us not to move policy, but to investigate topics. And so the focus of that committee when I started it was, what do we do when abortion rights are taken away nationwide? And it really set us up to be prepared at the fall of Roe for California to lead the nation in protecting women's access to comprehensive health care, including abortion. And then, once we felt like we had done a ton on that work, we moved to maternal mortality. And especially during the pandemic, those rates skyrocketed because people were not getting the preventative care they needed, the prenatal care. And then, as I started to approach menopause, we used that space to start to look into menopause. So it was sort of this journey for me through, the stages of reproductive life that this committee has taken. But menopause has in some ways been by far the most interesting, because I think it's unexpected to people that we're having these conversations. I've talked about maternal mortality and abortion, and these are not, but when we talked about vaginal dryness, people were shocked. And urinary incontinence and all the things that happen to women at this point in their lives. And people were stopping me in the bathroom in the Capitol and being like, I learned so much watching your hearing, because they're televised, so people could watch them wherever they were. But, one of the things we were really doing was trying to get our male colleagues to come to those hearings. And I ended up co-chairing one of them. I was planning to co-chair it with the Senate chair the Senate Health Committee chair, who was Senator Eggman, a woman from the Central Valley, and then she was replaced, as any chair can be at any moment, by a general, a very senior man in the legislature who's very serious, Senator Roth. And we had already set this hearing, and we were co-chairing it. I'm like, oh my gosh, I'm going to have to sit next to Senator Roth and talk about vaginas. And that was making me a little nervous, I'm going to be honest with you. He came, he sat through the whole hearing, and I want you to know that when we got to as I said, he's a former general, he's a veteran. We got to the mental health portion of the hearing, and he just leaned forward and leaned in and started engaging in this really intense way, because for him, that's been an issue he's really championed and cared about in the legislature, is mental health. And all of a sudden, he was learning about the connection of menopause and mental health, and that women, are being mistreated when we reach mental health challenges at this point in our life. And he asked all these questions, and he'd found his hook. All of a sudden, he cared so deeply about us getting good menopausal care. I think that is, sadly, we are actually now at 49% women in the California legislature as of November.
Oh, wow.
Which is amazing.
That's good.
And just to give you context, when I joined 6 years ago, we were at less than 25%.
Wow.
I know. So in 6 years, we have fought to almost half. We thought we were going to get to half, and we lost one seat that we thought we were going to get. But Nevada's majority women. We're almost half women. But most legislators and Congress are this much. There are so few women in government. And so we also need to get our men engaged in this. We have to have male allies, and for them to understand that the women in their lives, whether they're in heterosexual relationships with a woman who's going to go through menopause, or their sister, or there's someone in their life they love who's going to go through menopause, that this matters to them too, and that us getting good health care matters. And why does it matter, and what are the things we experience? One of my dear friends in the legislature, who is a man, always says to me, he's a little younger than me, and he's like, oh, well, now I'm ready when my wife goes through it, because you've gotten me all ready. So, I do think that having these conversations is important, and our lawmakers need to hear us talking about it, and clearly nobody's talking to our governor enough about it, so that's what Halle Berry's going to do. But, I'm bringing Halle Berry to the party. That's my plan, guys, just so we know. Okay, no. So what happened was, when you're moving a bill and you're sort of at the end, you start to engage with the governor's office. They can't change a bill, right? They can only up or down veto it. So when it gets to his desk, no changes, just is he going to sign it or is he going to veto it? So sort of at the end of the process, one of the things we do is we start to engage with the policy shop in the governor's office about our bills. So we did that. One of my favorite women in his policy shop was assigned to the bill. So as I said, it was insurance coverage. When we drafted it, we wanted equity, so it covered both private payers, so private insurance companies, and the Medi-Cal system. We were in a deficit last year, and so they said to us, we can't afford to do Medi-Cal. I'd gotten it through both appropriations committees because we had women chairs of both committees who felt strongly that equity was important, but they thought it was a cost issue, which I understood. That's real. So we did remove Medi-Cal from the bill in the Senate. We thought that was going to get us a signature. Again, I had no idea they were going to veto it. But every vetoed bill comes with a letter that explains the veto. So I do have a letter. That's all I know is what's in the letter. The letter is something we had heard in committee that I thought was a little crazy. So if I asked you the question, who's going to protect you and your health more? Your doctor or your insurance company? Which would you say? Okay, me too. So we kept hearing from the insurance company that the reason they deny coverage for these medicines is because they're protecting us from our doctors. And I was like, I'm pretty sure that's not what you're doing. I'm pretty sure my doctor, who sat with me before prescribing this medication for over an hour, cares more about my health than you, the insurance company. Let me just be clear about that. But so one of the things we did was we said they couldn't override a doctor's order. That if a doctor ordered it, they had to pay for it. They didn't like that very much. And part of that is because of this lack of FDA approval, right? So most of the time we say that they cover FDA-approved drugs. Well, we couldn't say that because so much of what we need is not FDA approved in this space. It's off-label use. Because we actually have, so I'm a big good government nerd, so I'm going to tell you something nerdy, but we have this thing called CHBRP, which is a funny name. But anytime you do a bill that affects insurance rates, there is a center at UC Berkeley that studies the bill and the effect on insurance and whether premiums will go up, like how will this affect the insurance ecosystem. That is actually one of the best things we do. Like, we should do that for every bill and how it affects the economy, but we only do it for insurance bills. So we actually, when we initially introduced the bill, we were doing it just to get the CHBRP analysis because we couldn't get an answer on what was covered. Like, we couldn't even find out from the different insurance companies, what do you cover, what don't you cover? When that analysis came back, it actually showed that the vast majority of what the average woman who doesn't have high risk, the estradiol patch, is covered. It's really, what wasn't covered, they found, was, treatments, vaginal treatments, so women who can't have systemic estrogen, the testosterone, and those were the treatments. It was also lining up that the treatments that were not covered were the ones that we knew wouldn't be covered unless we really use these tricky things to say our doctors know us best. If our doctors are prescribing this menopausal care, insurance companies, you need to cover it. The other thing we really were focused on was the mental health piece, right? We know many women are prescribed at the menopausal age when they come with depression and anxiety. They're prescribed depression and anxiety drugs instead of hormones. And so we also wanted to make sure that if you were being treated for mental health symptoms with hormones, that was still covered. But that's sort of not a nexus the insurance companies love either. So he bought their argument that they were protecting us and our doctors weren't. And I don't agree.
So I just want to go back to something that you said, which was shocking to me, is that you talked to your doctor for an hour. Because most doctors, even the good ones, this is not, talk about how they get reimbursed. They have 15 minutes with you. And this is such a personal discussion. How do you actually reveal everything emotionally that you
Keep talking.
that you have in 15 minutes? And doctors hate that. They hate that they can't spend more time with their patients. So, it's why I laughed and said your insurance company is the one who's driving all your medical care, because if your doctor can't spend the time with you because he or she won't get reimbursed, you're not going to get the care you need. And if you're using an emergency department as your primary care, you're never going to get the kind of care you need on this. And a lot of insurance companies don't let you stay with mental health issues for more than a few weeks or a couple of months. So while doctors should be driving and how wonderful that this person spent an hour with you, the fact is that dollars drive so much of what we get. And that's where it has to change too. Insurance companies are for-profits. They want to make the most money, and they churn you out after 15 minutes, and there's no way to get to the heart of a matter that's so personal about our lives in 15 minutes.
And I'll say that the other thing that makes me angry about my veto was the Jacoba analysis, because so much was covered, said that the cost of the system would be negligible, actually. And so this was a very low-cost bill. And if you think about the downstream impacts to our healthcare system, it would save us a ton of money. I have lots of feeling that's why I'm not. So what am I doing differently was the question to not get a veto. I refuse to give up on what I think is good policy. So I literally have reintroduced exactly that part of the bill that he vetoed, which maybe, I have a lot of time. Again, I had huge bipartisan support, so the legislature is going to love it again. And then we'll engage in conversations with them. But I do think the veto message, to be frank with you, I think highlighted one of the major issues here, which was a lack of understanding. They didn't understand why there weren't more FDA-approved drugs. It's because the research isn't there, right? So it's sort of this cycle of we don't do the research, so we can't get the FDA approval, so they're not going to cover it. But so I think what I'm hoping is that we can actually get the education such that they'll understand why this bill made sense. My guess is that, to be frank with you, they were nervous about us setting a precedent around coverage of these off-label uses in other areas, which that makes a little bit of sense to me. But I think this is an area that is so unique in that it affects so many people and it is so understudied that, we have the power not to do this in other areas. Like, let's just not do that. Yeah. Yeah, I will say the Menopause Manifesto also, if you're a reader, that book's really good too. Podcasts are good, books are good too.
Yeah, Kelly is just so wonderful.
Yeah.
I was so grateful that she gave us the time that she did, and she comes to it with a kind of a different perspective, but she's also so articulate and so kind of down to earth about everything. And just there's other people that you can source. Mary Jane Milken, who wasn't in it this much, but she is such an expert on vaginal issues, and you can find her, and she does podcasts too, as does Wen Shen from Johns Hopkins, who, by the way, has a waiting list of 8 months to even see her. So, but there are these really good menopause doctors do have podcasts that are giving you the information that tells you what you can do. So I'm so glad you love Kelly. I will tell her that.
And I will say, but to your point, it shouldn't be like that.
I know.
And I will say that I mentioned it briefly, but I'll say it again, and it's in the movie. So the Menopause Society does have a website. You can go on their website and you can search for a provider by zip code, and it will tell you whether they're Menopause Society certified or not. In just a year, we've doubled the number of Menopause Society doctors in our own community, so it's growing, mostly because Dr. Leach is training them all. Thank you, Dr. Leach. But those doctors are trained to be having these conversations with you, to ask those questions. I know that many of them will send you a survey beforehand that asks menopause-related questions because they don't have the time, but at least then when you walk in, they have the information related to your menopause symptoms, because to the point that was made, this is so personal. Well, so I will say that my friend in Oakland found a Menopause Society Kaiser doctor on the website. So, okay, so I will say, I don't know, because you're right, I'm a PPO person, but I know my chief of staff has Kaiser, and I just told her to go have what I'm having, which isn't good medical advice. But okay, I'm not a doctor. I said that at the beginning. That was my disclaimer. Okay, so one of the things, we got 2 questions about this, so I think it's really important. The film highlights the silence surrounding menopause, which I think is really important. It's why I do this. It's why I tell you all about my personal life, because what the hell. So one question was, why do you think it's remained so taboo? And the other question is, what can we do to sort of break that silence and have those conversations, and especially in, culturally sensitive spaces?
Yeah, I think it's, this is not rocket science. I think we all are uncomfortable with thinking of we're getting older. We don't want to admit that we're getting older. And it's better now, but even in that quote that I found from Everything You Wanted to Know About Sex But Were Afraid to Ask, that was a bestseller, and he's saying, women, you're no longer a woman, but you're not really a man. Well, what kind of garbage is that? But that is what got fed to women, that we have a sell-by date. And the sell-by date is when we can no longer have children. Lisa talks about that. If you can't bear children to a man, then you're not worth anything. That kind of, so you don't want to admit, sorry, I'm going back, you don't want to admit that you're in that group that is now old. You don't want to say, wait, this is the last third of my life. You don't want to say that. And I think one of the things that is changing is because these remarkable women who can get the bully pulpit are saying, wait a moment, I'm 60, I'm 54, I'm still wonderful, I'm here, and I'm going through terrible menopause symptoms, but I'm not going to suffer in silence. One of the things that I worry about is perimenopausal women, because how are we going to get 40-year-old Halle Berrys to talk about this? Because that's
Maybe I'm the 40-year-old Halle Berry, Cody.
I hope so. I hope so. I think, you need sort of role models who say, no, look, you're still fantastic. And I worry that, yes, I'm glad you're going to do that.
Totally kidding, by the way.
But, I was talking to an expert in perimenopause, and she said, yeah, we're having trouble having anybody in their early 40s, actresses, I'm now talking about celebrities, to come out and say this. So there's still such a stigma that you're no longer sexual because you don't bear children, or you're going through perimenopause, and then you'll be in menopause. And all of this means that society still sees you as less than. And I think that films like this, with the remarkable people that we got to talk on camera, meetings like this, all of this will contribute to no longer being silent about it. And just the final thing I'll say about that is I think younger women don't intend to be silent about it at all. They are so engaged in this, and they're saying, I want to know everything. I'm never going to settle for a doctor who tells me, no, just it's all in your head. As Lisa and Sharon say, of course it's all in your head. That's where our brains are.
What I'll say, 2 things. One is, I decided tonight while I was watching the film, because I'm perimenopausal, I'm not menopausal yet, I'm going to have a menopause party. I think I'm gonna like throw a party when I make it to that year point. I think we should all do it. Let's all commit. We're all gonna have menopause parties. Okay. It's like my bat mitzvah, but the other side, I don't know. And the other thing though is that I was talking to a college-age woman I know who just got her first IUD. And she was telling me that she's like, I don't understand why they don't manage our pain. And I said, what do you mean? Now, I'm 46. I'll confess to all of you that I've had an IUD put in. And I was like, what do you mean? And she's like, why did they, like, I didn't understand why nobody talked to me about the pain or treated me for the pain. Oh. And I had never, ever asked that question. And I was like, oh my God, I love that you're saying that. Yes. Why aren't they talking to us about the pain? Why aren't they managing the pain? But this was, a 20-something woman. And I think to your point, they're going to demand even more than we're demanding. And that is so, so powerful. So I do think as the generations feel more empowered, we will continue to get better and better, but we shouldn't have to wait, because those of us that are going through it now can't wait for those 20-somethings to go through it. Although I will say that my staffers on my menopause bills, one of whom is here, Marin left, okay. Both are in their early 20s, and they're like, we are ready. They now are experts in menopause in their early 20s. So there you go. I'm getting my
that's a couple of the women who worked on this documentary. Our wonderful supervising producer and our editor are both younger, and they say, now we know so much about this. Now we know. And our editor was editing, everybody does everything remotely. She has two sons who are in teenage years, and they were listening to all of this. So maybe young men will feel differently about a lot of the things that women go through. I hope so.
I will say I'm one of 4, and I have a brother. So 3 girls and a boy in my family. And my brother has never been afraid of tampons because he grew up with 3 sisters, so maybe that's what you need. I know that we're at our last 2 minutes. So the last question actually, which I loved, was we must have someone here from Rossmore, because this is a Rossmore-related question. There we go. So Rossmore is our very large senior community. And so the question was, for Rossmore, but I think others may have this question, is if they want to share this with their community, how do they get screenings at Rossmore or at their church or at their Girl Scout troop?
Yeah, we have a website. We have a website for that. Okay. You can go to the mfactorfilm.com and put in that you want to do a screening, and we have a staff who's doing this now. It turns out we've had 500 screenings since the film debuted in October, including 40 internationally. And believe me, I don't even know how they're getting it internationally because it isn't even available, but everybody knows how to go around firewalls and things. But we don't have a firewall on screenings. You just need to apply for it, and they will help you do that. And you can do that through the website.
So, thank you, Kobe, for
pleasure.
being here and for sharing this amazing film with us. And for making the film. I mean, it's like we talk about the silence, but I think this is the answer. It really is giving us the resources to have these conversations. As I mentioned, my website, you can find information on the bills, the recordings of those events and hearings I mentioned on the topic. And we have resources at the table in the back. I will say that one of the things that we are going to do differently, because I didn't expect the veto, we didn't really do, it was so popular in the legislature that we didn't expect. But now we know that when we get to that point, we're going to need you and every friend of yours in the state of California, and we're 51% of the population, to be calling the governor's office and telling us this matters. So we will be sending you information about that. So stay tuned. And check out other events we're having. We really love these film screenings. We did Gabby Gifford's movie on gun violence prevention. We're gearing up to do a movie on plastic pollution and the environment. So we do sort of a movie series here, and they're really fun events. So we hope you'll continue to join us, because it's really fun to be with all of you and to represent you every day. Oh, Dr. Leach is raising his hand, so I'm giving him the last word. Yes. leachobgyn@gmail.com. And lastly, I really want to thank my staff who is here, Michelle, Donna, Charisse, Lauren, Marin, Stephanie. They work incredibly hard for each and every one of you every day, and I could not be a quarter of the legislator I am with each and every one of them. So thank you guys.